we'll begin. Good evening, everybody. Thank you for coming tonight. My name is Dorothy Chambers. I'm the program director at Candle's Holocaust Museum and Education Center. Today marks the first in a week of programs on Holocaust and genocide, titled Night of Broken Glass, Remembering the Holocaust. Night of Broken Glass is the result of collaboration between Indiana State University and Kansas Holocaust Museum. And we are really honored to be here tonight at United Hebrew Congregation for two presentations. The first is My Memories of Kristallnacht, and the second is titled Czech Survivor number 32379. The term Night of Broken Glass is the English translation of the German word Kristallnacht, referring to the violent events that took place in Germany and Austria 77 years ago today. So, without further ado, Walter Sommers.
I'm sorry, you have to accept the fact that I have to be seated while I'm talking, but I'm trying to project my voice in such a way that you can hear me all right. My name is Walter Sommers, and I'm born and raised in Frankfurt, Germany. My parents were people who only knew one country, that was Germany, going back 3 or 4 generations. I can trace my family back to about 1820, 1830, when one of my forefathers built a house and was able to get some land and build a house, raise some cattle, and grow small crops about maybe 150 miles north and east of the city of Frankfurt, Frankfurt on the Main in Germany. My parents had the wonderful foresight that I should learn foreign languages. My father only spoke German. My mother had some knowledge of French and English, but basically the language spoken in our home, in my grandparents' home, was German. And it had to be proper German. No dialect was tolerated. So I was sent to a very fine gymnasium-type school where we went to class 6 days a week. I don't think we had more than maybe 6 weeks of vacation throughout the whole year. We had a lot of homework every night. And at age 10, I had to study French. At age 11, I had to study English. At age 12, I had to study Spanish. The Nazis came to power in 1933. There was lots of discrimination. It was very obvious that my future would be very dim. At the age of 17, I decided to leave home, and I became an apprentice at a small export-import company in the beautiful city of Hamburg, Germany, the main export city in Central Europe at that particular point in time. I knew this would give me an occasion to further my knowledge of English and Spanish, and also I was really determined to leave Germany with all the discrimination, job discrimination against Jewish people that was in place long before the Holocaust started. So, as a result, consequently, on a Thursday night, it was November 9th, 1938, we were on our way home. There was another apprentice with me. We were riding bicycles. And, but I must say, prior to that, I had learned that some terrible things could happen, but we had no idea what it might be. I was a member of a Jewish B'nai B'rith, a youth group, and we had learned that some Jewish people who were not German citizens, who had immigrated from Poland in 1919, when that part of Germany had to be given to Poland, had moved into Germany and had never acquired their German citizenship. We were told that there is a potential possibility for problems. Well, sure enough, it was sometime in October. These people were given 48 hours to pack their belongings, get on designated trains, and they were shipped back to Poland. Well, Poland decided, the Polish government decided, they left Germany in the early 20s, they're not coming back to Poland. And the train stood in no man's land for several days. Well-meaning Catholic Polish people got some food and drink, but it was not sufficient to keep everybody healthy and alive. The father, the son of one of the victims who died on these trains, happened to live in Paris, France, and he became so angry he got himself a gun and took a shot at a German embassy official. And that occurred during the first week in November. I would say probably around November 2nd or 3rd. Well, the Nazi government said, we will not stand for that. We are not going to let these damn Jews shoot down our ambassadors. And so here we are on the afternoon of November 9th, 1938. We were on our way home on bicycles. I had a good Christian friend who was with me, and this is what we saw. It was dirty mobs of people with crowbars and sledgehammers smashing the display windows of retail stores belonging to Jewish merchants, throwing merchandise out in the street. Police were standing by. Stormtroopers in brown uniforms stood around and were laughing, and the mob just did their job. And it was an unreal experience for us. We managed to get our bicycles through this mob of people, and we were on our way home. And a little bit further down the street, we became aware of the fact that a synagogue had been set afire. The fire department was there, but stormtroopers prevented the fire department from putting the fire out. During that night, they burned down 275 synagogues all over Germany. To date, they have rebuilt about half of them. But when I visited Germany several years ago, we took a little trip to the southern part of Germany, and we stopped at a small town, and the tour guide very proudly wanted to show us one of the rebuilt synagogues. And when I asked them, when do they have services here? The answer was, we would love to have services, however, there are no Jewish people living here. Before the Nazis came to power, there were about 400,000 Jewish people living in Germany out of a total German population of about 45 million, so a little less than 1%. At that particular time in 1938, there were about 300,000 Jewish people living in Germany. So we went on home, and when I got home, I was renting a room from a very nice Christian landlady. She said, you may not be safe here, because word had spread that police had entered some of the Jewish homes and had arrested Jewish men and taken them down to the police station. So fortunately, I had some good friends who happened to have Romanian citizenship, and they called me and invited me, and I stayed with them. However, during that same night, they arrested all the Jewish men that they could possibly find, including my father. And my father's arrest was in a very peculiar way. Like I said, my parents lived in the city of Frankfurt, and it was a little bit before midnight that a friendly policeman came to my parents' home and told my father he should get ready to come down to the police station. And he happened to know my father from way back. And so there is this picture of the policeman, my father and my mother sitting in the kitchen around midnight having an early breakfast. My father was taken down to the police station where there were quite a few other Jewish men who had already been arrested, and they were eventually turned over to a group of stormtroopers who marched them in a very violent manner to a train station, and my father was taken to the Buchenwald concentration camp. The pattern of destruction in Germany during that night on November 9th varied very widely. While some of the Jewish-owned retail stores were very badly managed on November 9th, and merchandise was thrown out in the street, most of the homes in the city of Frankfurt were untouched in the area where my parents lived. But in other areas, stormtroopers invaded private homes, threw furniture out the window, and beat people up. So the next day, I got a call from my employer, and they said I should not come to work. Of course, it happened to be on a Friday morning, but they were very, very supportive. They said, you will keep working, and they had me working on ocean-going ships. So I was very safe there, and I took care of documentation and supervised the loading of merchandise that we were exporting to South American countries. This was the beginning of the Holocaust, and in some cities things went from bad to worse. Eventually, my father and other people and other men were released when we could prove emigration. And fortunately, my parents had applied for immigration to the United States, and our papers came through, and we were able to leave Germany in January 1939. This was only the beginning. Unfortunately, the way it played out of a population of 400,000 Jews, only about barely 100,000 were alive in Germany at the end of World War II. They had been, many of them had, through intermarriage, were able to hide with their Christian families, and so their life was safe. But the total was that 6 million Jews were killed, and 12 million Christians. This is a fact that is very little known. Now, the question was, who were the Christians who were killed? Well, first of all, there were German people who disagreed with the Nazis. All you had to do is open your mouth and show some disagreement or ask questions, and that was the reason to be put in the cattle car and shipped to places like Auschwitz. And your chances were very good that you were gassed or killed in some other way. The other Christians who were killed, they might have had a Jewish grandfather or Jewish grandmother. They had different degrees. But it was a most horrible scene. And that's about all I can tell you about Kristallnacht. And I think this is something that we should never forget. We should know that it was these events. The Nazis were actually looking for an excuse, and they found the excuse when a Jewish man in Paris became so enraged about the way his family was treated that he felt himself compelled to take a shot at a German embassy official and kill him. If that hadn't happened, they probably would have found some other excuse. But it was just the beginning of Hitler's idea to kill all the Jews in Europe, and he almost pretty much succeeded. Thank you very much for listening. Do I have any questions? Yeah, absolutely.
Does anyone have questions for Walter?
Any question regarding the Holocaust?
I have one over here.
Yeah.
As I was researching, I found that Germany issued official numbers that only 100 Jews were killed the night of Kristallnacht. That was the official number. 90 actually.
100 Jews were killed the night of the
Kristallnacht. That was the official German number. Was your experience?
I didn't know that any numbers were available. Yeah. I don't know. I can't comment on that. I don't know. I have no. I know that it varied from area to area. In the state of Bavaria, things were a lot worse than they were around the city of Frankfurt. And it's very hard to tell, really. I also know I had an uncle living in Cologne, which is in the Rhineland, and he was hardly aware that anything was going on. So it varied, but it just varied from area to area. I know one thing, the people who did all that harm in the city of Hamburg were not citizens of the city of Hamburg. We could tell by the way they spoke German that they had come from further east, and I was told that they were from Berlin, the capital of Germany. So I don't know. Yeah.
Was Kristallnacht after the Anschluss with Austria?
Oh yeah. Austria was annexed in March 1938. 38 is really the critical year. In March 1938, German troops marched into Austria, and if you go to Austria nowadays, you hear that they were very unhappy with the German occupation. But I know different. I know that some of the Austrian women were handing flowers to the arriving German soldiers. And that was depicted in the newspapers in the city of Hamburg at that particular point in time. That was in March. But worse things happened, really. 1938 was just a horrible year. It was in August 1938, at the Munich conference, that Mr. Hitler decided that Germany was entitled to have the eastern part of the Czech Republic, which were German-speaking people lived, Sudeten Germans. And representatives of France and England just caved in and said, Mr. Hitler, those were the very words. If that will make you happy, move your troops in. And 1/3 of Czechoslovakia became part of Nazi Germany. So all of Europe just caved into Hitler. It was an unbelievable thing, really. And in fact, the head of the British government, Mr. Chamberlain, maybe you've heard that name before, he went back to London, England, and he announced peace in our time. That's how they felt in August 1938.
Did your father tell you much about his treatment while he was?
He was in the concentration camp for 4 weeks. He came back ashen gray. His head had been shorn. He didn't want to talk about anything, but eventually, over time, I heard that concentration camps at that point in time were not to be compared with what concentration camps turned out later on. They were just horrible places where people had no rights. For instance, they would not get any water all day long, and then eventually at night they would be given some herring to eat. You can imagine that, and no water. So the thirst was tremendous. They were made to stand at attention maybe for 2 or 3 hours. In the cold of November. That's the kind of stuff. So of course people got sick and some people died, but the important thing is anybody who was sent to a concentration camp at that point in time had no rights whatsoever and no protection.
Your father was how old when he was there?
Pardon?
How old was your father at that time?
At that time, let's see, he was born in 87, so that was 51. He was 51
Were
years
your
old.
grandparents still alive? Were your grandparents still alive?
No, my grandparents were not alive anymore at that point in time. Yeah, right. Well, it was very fortunate. My parents, I had persuaded my parents that it was hard time to think about leaving Germany, and they did that very, very reluctantly because my father only spoke German, my mother spoke some English and some French. They said I should leave Germany and go wherever I could go because you have to understand, immigrating legally to the United States in 1938 was very complicated. Number one, you had to come in under the quota, and the quota at that point in time officially was about 24,000 German citizens per year, but because of heavy unemployment, they reduced that to 15,000. So that's one thing. The other thing is you had to have a living relative. So now I'm asking you, do you have a living relative in Germany? Probably not. Well, we didn't have a living relative in America that we knew. But through a cousin once removed, he gave us the address of a cousin of his living in New Jersey. And my parents, thank goodness, wrote to him, I think, back in July or August at my urging. And he wrote back, yes, I'm going to send you an affidavit, but also wrote him a letter, please don't ask us for a penny. Yeah. My parents lost all their savings, but we were permitted to take all household goods and all furniture and artwork, anything like that with us. And in fact, the most precious thing that we came to America with was a Leica camera. Yeah. Now, if I'm permitted, I'd like to talk about what it was like for us to come to America at that point in time. We landed. Well, first of all, I want to talk about leaving Germany. Before you could go, even think about going to, immigrating to America, you had to go to an American consulate for a physical examination, physical and mental examination. America did not want any immigrants who were physically or mentally deficient. So all of us passed very, very well. And my father was in very bad physical condition, but the American consul just looked at him and said, oh, you're okay. So that was the luckiest thing that could happen. And now another incredible thing that happened when we were on the train And at the border, we were sitting in a compartment. In Germany, they had compartments on trains. A 6-foot-tall SS man came in a black uniform and demanded to see our papers. Well, of course, our papers were okay. And then he made a long speech about such nice people as my parents and my sister and I were leaving Germany. He said it was such a shame. It was Germany's loss for us to leave. And my parents couldn't believe that kind of talk coming from an SS man. So that was the last German person that we spoke to on our way to America. Now let me tell you what it was like coming to America, and this is very important to remember. We were on a small boat and landed in Hoboken, New Jersey in January 1939. And on board were some German Nazis with big swastikas in their lapel. And when the ship docked, the American immigration official came aboard and he spotted the Nazis with their swastikas, and he said, "These people come off first." And he barely looked at their papers, barely. I think he spent about 5 minutes. And then there was a group of my parents and 4 or 5 other families, and they asked me to be the spokesperson at that time, because my English was a little bit better than anybody else's. And the questions that were asked, whether my father ever had been a member of the Communist Party. Well, of course not. And then the other question that was asked, whether my father had ever attempted to overthrow the Nazi government. Those were the questions asked by an American immigration official. And eventually he permitted us to set foot on American soil. Amazing.
Yeah.
Right.
Why is it, do you think, that the Nazis
I
got
beg your
special
pardon?
treatment? Why did the Nazis get special treatment?
That's another good question. From 1934 on up, the Nazi government was America's #1 friend. Now try to understand that. The American government had better relationships with Berlin and the Nazi government than with the French or the English. And one of the main reasons was that Germany had the strongest army in 1934-1935 and was the strongest bulwark against Russian communism. The Russians under Stalin had thousands of tanks and thousands of warplanes. And before Hitler came to power, Germany was forbidden to have tanks or planes. And so after the Nazis came to power and rearmed and tore up the Treaty of Versailles, Germany became the #1 defense between the capitalist West and Russian and communist Russia. But Nazi Germany was #1 with the American State Department.
Well, I'd
That's
like to
another
think that
fact that we
maybe,
had. Pardon?
I'd like to think maybe we were following the policy of keep your friends close and your enemy even closer.
Exactly. And I'm here to tell you, I'm a combat veteran of World War II in the American Army. And after the Nazis invaded Poland in August 1939, and several European countries had guaranteed the borders of Poland. And eventually France and England declared war on Germany. America did nothing. America just stood aside. I was working in New York City at that point in time, in 1939, and whenever I talked to people and asked them, I said, "Do you think that America will enter in a war against Germany?" Everybody that I talked to at that point in time said, "We've had enough of World War I. We are not going to get involved in World War II." And so I'm here to tell you that the Japanese had been so stupid to bomb Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, who knows what might have happened. In fact, in October 1941, an American, I think it was a destroyer, it was a small Navy ship, was torpedoed by a German warship off the coast of Denmark, and 100 American sailors were killed. And it was printed in the New York Times, and I remember at that point in time we really felt surely America is going to declare war on Germany. It did not happen. There were just write-ups in the newspaper, and that was the end of it. America accepted that defeat. And in fact, there were skirmishes on the East Coast, and American destroyers kind of kept German U-boats at bay. But if the Japanese had not bombed Pearl Harbor on December 7th, 1941, I'm not sure whether we would have gotten involved in the war. That's a fact. And God knows what would have happened, I know. Because the Nazis occupied all of Europe. And Hitler was determined to kill every Jewish person in Europe to begin with. And he pretty near succeeded. And
If I'm not mistaken, the time that you mentioned the sinking of the destroyer.
October 1941.
We had a Lend-Lease program that was supporting Britain. American volunteers were going over to Britain, fighting in the RAF.
I know.
And that was and the pattern is the same as in World War I. We didn't get involved in World War I until 1918. Getting into the war, wars late.
Well, we got involved in World War I after the Lusitania was signed in 1915. And in May 1915, the Lusitania was sunk, and 28 Americans lost their lives as a result. But at that time, nobody wanted to go to war. So eventually, President Woodrow Wilson declared war on Germany, I think it was in September 1915. But the American army was totally unprepared. It wasn't until 1917 that American troops landed in France. But here's the thing. This is just my personal opinion. I haven't seen anybody write a book about it. If America had not ended the war in 1917, it so happened that German troops were 30 miles outside of Paris, and my father was in that German army in 1918, 30 miles outside of Paris in July 1918. But it was because of 2 American divisions, and one of them was my own outfit, the 77th Infantry Division, that kept the German army at bay, and the German army had to retreat. And it was the very fact that the German army ran out of food, and Germany ran out of food, while America was feeding the French and the English with everything they needed, and the German army had to ask President Wilson for armistice, and here you have November 11, 1918. And if Germany would have won World War I, which it militarily actually did, because German troops were on French soil for 4 years. No French troops ever entered German soil during World War I. If Germany would have won the war, we wouldn't be sitting here tonight talking about a Holocaust. I'm sorry to tell you that. That's about the way it is, but we can't change historical events.
Deborah has a question.
Yeah.
I remember a while back you came to talk with my daughter's class here at the synagogue, and one of the things that really stood out that you said that I think it would be really interesting for some of the other students here was you mentioned briefly your time at the gymnasium, but I remember you saying how integrated the Jewish people and the German people were.
Oh, we were 100% integrated. My grandfather was in the Prussian army in 1870, He was in field artillery, and he was awarded the Iron Cross second class by the Kaiser. That was in 1870. My father fought in the German army in World War I, but he was slightly wounded and got sick, and he was dismissed eventually. Yeah. So, yeah, we were as well integrated into German society, German culture, German literature, as American Jews are in America. Yeah, very, very differently. And it all started at the time when Napoleon ran all over Europe, and it was King Frederick I in around 1815, King Frederick I of Prussia, who had heard of Moses Mendelssohn and asked to have Moses Mendelssohn brought into the Prussian court. And he talked to him for several days, and he said, "This man is very intelligent, he's got wonderful ideas. We are totally wrong to make these people live in separate quarters called ghettos. Open the doors and let them live wherever they wanted to live." And it was here around 1820 when my grandfather traveled about 150 miles and acquired land. Up to that time, Jews were forbidden to own land. And if you couldn't own land, you had no way to grow food. And life was miserable. Right. So, but that was all changed. And actually, France and Germany were in the lead in making life normal for Jewish people. But actually, the country, the European country that was did even better was England. In England, Jewish people did not have to live in ghettos, and they were accepted by society long before they were accepted in France or in Germany.
Other questions?
Yeah.
Was there a question back here?
Yeah. Did you want to ask a question?
Did someone have a question?
I'll ask something. You go ahead, because you've been waiting.
When you were talking about the United States staying out of World War II,
The United States being what?
well, when you talked about the United States not getting involved in World War II,
Yeah.
if I'm not mistaken, I think it was Germany that declared war on the United States after the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor, not the United States. It was Germany who declared war on the U.S. So even after the bombing of Pearl Harbor,
I don't know. That's, my information is that the United States declared war on Japan
right,
on December 8th,
right.
and along with it also declared war on Germany,
Oh, okay.
because Germany and Japan
Worked
had an
together.
alliance,
Mhm.
and they worked together.
Right.
And in fact, it was one of the worst disappointments for Mr. Hitler. And at that time, the German troops were in North Africa, and it was General Rommel who came to Mr. Hitler. He said, "Mr. Hitler, times have changed. We have to pull our troops back and go back onto European soil. We got no business being being stretched out into North Africa, because American troops will land here within a year or two," and by golly, they did. Yes, that's correct.
Walter?
Yeah.
Why is Germany was such a cultural, wonderful place prior to the war? I mean, culturally and
I can't hear you.
educationally, German was a good place to live, as you described. How in the world did the German people vote for Hitler? I don't
Okay.
understand that, and you
The
told me
question is,
briefly.
how was it possible that's a very good question. How was it possible for the majority of the German people to vote for Hitler? Okay. Number one, you've got to remember, God bless our two-party system. Germany had 21 different parties in 1933. They couldn't get together. If Germany would have won World War I, Adolf Hitler would have been painting houses. He would have been a house painter. But that was not the case. He spoke the language that people connected with the army Then there was a society who believed, a Christian society that believed German people, 6 feet tall with blue eyes, had a God-given right to rule the world. And it was all a reaction to the horrible Treaty of Versailles. Hitler said, if you vote for me and we will take over the government, I will tear down the Treaty of Versailles and we will rearm. Germany was forbidden to have tanks. Germany was forbidden to have planes, warplanes. And there was always that threat from Communist Russia. Communist Russia had thousands of planes, thousands of warplanes, and thousands of tanks. And when Hitler tore up the Treaty of Versailles in late 1933 and said, we are going to rearm, the money came from the very countries that had written the Treaty of Versailles, France and England. The United States did not sign the Treaty of Versailles. President Woodrow Wilson had walked away from it and predicted here the seats for World War II. But money came from the United States, money came from Western European countries for the German army to rearm. The German peoples saw in Hitler a leader that was lacking among the other parties, if that answers your question. He spoke a language that a lot of German people wanted to hear. We will get even with the French and the English. We will rearm. We will not sit quietly, and we will no longer make reparation payments that ruined the German economy back in 1923 and 24.
So you're telling us that
Yeah.
a two-party...
It was 33% of the vote. There were 21 political parties on January 30th, 1933, and Hitler, the Nazi Party, got 33% of the vote, Social Democrats about 22%, Communists about 17%. Then there were several other there was a Catholic Party, there was another German nationalist party called the Stahlhelm Party. It's called Stahlhelm means Steelhammer Party. There was a conservative nationalist party that even friends of my father voted for. That was the feeling. It was people were feeling for Germany to have a revival. I would say your question was, what made so many people vote for Hitler? And it was the idea of Germany becoming great again. Germany, and some felt that we should get even with the people who wrote the Treaty of Versailles, that they blamed Germany exclusively for World War I, and that is not correct either. France had a reason to go to war, and there was a rivalry between the German fleet and the English fleet. There were many factors that led to World War I. Okay?
That was good, but what you're saying is it's important to have a two-party system. As much as we get aggravated, Americans, with our parties, our two-party system,
it's the best system there is.
that's what I wanted to hear you say.
God bless our two-party system, even though it's not perfect.
We will have time at the end with the reception. We'll have more time to ask questions.